So hello, today I'm at the Church of St Mary the Virgin in Tilty in Essex, and I'd like to talk to you about the history of the hamlet and the church itself. So Tilty's a very small hamlet. It's 4.5 miles from Great Dunmow and 4 miles from Thaxted. Tilty is surrounded by farmland and twisty lanes. The River Chelmer passes through via the Chelmer Valley. Today's population is around 100. So far the smallest community I've come across on my travels, beating Pagglesham's 254. Now only miles away in nearby Broxted, a couple extending their home in 1979 found a flint axe head. Now the archaeologists dated it as Neolithic, between 4000 and 2500 BC. Great Dunmow, just over 4 miles away, had a large Roman settlement spanning over 4 centuries, so it's likely that Tilty was farmed by the early settlers. Now, 2 theories exist for Tilty's unusual name. It was Tyler the man who had an enclosure here, or the name derives from the Saxon word for tilled or cultivated. Now, in 1066, Doding was the overlord here. Doding was also recorded as owning a manor in London between 1036 and 1053. Now, by 1086, the Norman Henry de Ferrers was both tenant-in-chief and lord of the manor here. A small settlement of 3 villagers, 6 smallholders and 3 slaves made up the workforce, along with 3 plough teams and 40 cattle, right here at Tilty. In 1153, in the reign of King Stephen, the last Norman king, the manor here was owned by Maurice Fitzgeoffrey. Maurice would found an abbey here dedicated to St Mary on the 22nd of September 1153. Now it looks like Maurice was under instruction from the de Ferrers family, who part funded the abbey. Now the first abbot here was Simon of 1188 of the Cistercian order. The Cistercians branched off from the Benedictine monks from the Citeaux in eastern France, excuse my pronunciation. They had sister abbeys in Yorkshire, Bedfordshire and Wales. In the distance you can see what's left of the abbey itself. Now Tilty made an ideal location, as the requirement of solitude and a place away from man was required. I'm sure these sheep would agree. Now by 1214, Tilty's Abbey was described as being most beautiful and opulent. Then on Christmas Day 1215, during Mass, King John sent his soldiers in. 2 monks were killed and looting went on. Amazingly, the tombstones of the unfortunate monks survive inside St Mary's Church, and I calculated they were buried 807 years ago. Now Tilty Abbey would expand and prosper, and their lands extended to include fish ponds, vineyards for making wine or growing wine, and even a mill for making bread or flour. The mill and ponds have still survived. Isn't that impressive? We're looking at one of the ponds now. If you look, you can just see a sheep hiding under that tree. Now, Tilty Abbey excluded members of the public from receiving religious services, and by 1220 a separate church has been built, which we're looking at now. It's only 160 metres from the abbey itself. Described in Latin as Capella ante portas, which meant the chapel outside the gates, originally dedicated to St Thomas Becket the martyr, who was martyred or murdered in 1170. Ironically, it would be this chapel which would survive the abbey, and I calculated 322 years of daily routine of prayer and work. Then on February 1536, King Henry VIII's dissolution of the monasteries would come a-knocking. The original gate to the abbey would just be down there. Just to think that 3 centuries before, King John's soldiers had done the same. Now we know that in 1536 the abbot and 5 monks lived here. Abbot John Palmer and his 5 brethren were to remain in the abbey until the king's further pleasure. We know that 5 servants were also here. An inventory of goods included 2 altar cloths of white Bruges satin with red velvet spots, 4 wooden chests, 2 bound with iron, 2 tables, 5 trestles, 1 chair, 6 basins and 6 candlesticks. In the cellar, what was left over of barrels of beer, a pair of tongs and fire fork, 10 silver spoons which were handed over by the abbot himself, and a feather bed and many other items. Now in the church a list was also made: 12 candlesticks and 2 great lanterns, a pair of organs, 31 stock fishes, and I guess they were dried fish. Now Richard Cromwell, on behalf of the king, would sign the list. The late Abbot John Palmer signed the document. And so ended 403 years of abbey life here, and I counted 23 abbots before him. Now King Henry VIII would then grant the site of this abbey and St Mary's Church, Tilty Grange, the manor of Tilty, and all the other possessions to Sir Thomas Walden and his heirs. And a placard explains this part of the structure that's left, which is the West Range. You can see a diagram how it is now and how it was then. So it would have been used for storage. And it also said that the Cistercian lay brothers carried out the agricultural and industrial work. And they also kept their vows of obedience. And even a view from inside this range. Now we're leaving the boundary of the abbey itself. What I'd like to show you is this picture here. If we look at this diagram, we're virtually here, and the chapel is at the top there, which is the church today. And this is the building I'd like to show you, because this is the actual water mill. If I just pan around, there we go. So keep this gate locked because of the sheep. So we now move on to the water mill itself at Tilty. It's first mentioned in 1224, when the abbey's monks diverted water to their mill and fish ponds. A map dated 1594 shows the original mill. Now what we see today is a very rare and complete water mill from around 1775. This was owned by Sir Charles Maynard, who was a local landowner. And this mill had 14-inch water wheel powering 3 pairs of stones. If we go down the side here, you can still see some of the mechanics. Now the Marchioness of Dorset, a Margaret Wotton, lived here. She had a 60-year lease on the Grange lands, signed before the destruction of the abbey. And it all went to court and she won the case. Now Margaret had many grandchildren, and one was Lady Jane Grey, who would be Queen for 9 days before her tragic execution on Tower Hill, London. Lady Jane Grey would actually visit Margaret right here and stay at Tilty. So now we know that the Queen of England stayed here. Here we have an unusual story of a man who lived here, Hugh Cuthbertson, and he was known locally as the Baccy Parson. Now Baccy is a nickname for tobacco. Now Hugh was ordained as a priest in the 1920s, and he would take a post in South America, and soon after he would take a post in the Falkland Islands, believing it was in Scotland. Now from 1941, Cuthbertson would become vicar of Tilty, and during World War II the vicarage was put to good use, housing evacuees. The good vicar also organised allotments and even the parish invasion committee. Now in 1944, towards the end of the war, Cuthbertson laid on free beer for the villagers here, numbering less than 30 in the village hall, and I bet he was never forgotten. Now, having gained an experience in how to cure tobacco whilst in South America, Cuthbertson started growing tobacco right here in the vicarage garden. In 1949, tobacco was in short supply, so he would set up a tobacco club. Now this adventure would raise much needed funds for the very church we're looking at now. So not long after, it would advertise how to grow tobacco at home. In 1951 the BBC broadcast Songs of Praise, the programme, giving Cuthbertson the title The Baccy Parson. And after many years of service, the old vicar would retire here in the vicarage. Two Scottish artists, Robert McColloquin and Robert McBride, would end up living in London as part of the Bohemian group of artists. Nothing unusual in that, I hear you say, but Elizabeth Smart in 1947 was living right here at Tilty Mill, where we looked at before. And she had 4 children. She was actually the editor of House and Garden magazine. And she came to an agreement with the Roberts so they could act as housekeeper and nanny to the children, while she worked in London. Many of their art pieces were actually painted at the mill, while they were here itself. They did have a reputation for drinking, and I just wonder how many beers they would have had at the local pub, the Three Horseshoes, which I guess would have been their regular haunt. So now we're at the church itself, St Mary the Virgin. Now the walls are made of flint rubble, most likely from the local fields, and the dressings are limestone and clunch, which is a hard chalk. Now originally St Mary's was the chapel outside the gates, as said before, and originally it was a plain rectangular building from 1220. Most unusual gate. See a lot of planes and hear a lot of planes from Stansted Airport, which is very close by. So now we're looking at the south porch, which is 17th century. It's timber framed and plastered. Now we have a diagram on the wall here which gives a really good description of the abbey itself. And then on this side we've actually got some of the tiles, the bricks that were found. And you can see how many fish ponds they had. Incredible amount. You can see how they tap the streams here. Now we're looking at the south doorway, and it's got pointed and chamfered head and jambs. And it looks like above flowers from the Harvest Festival, perhaps, I'm not sure. So I should throw my cap as usual and have a look at these door jambs. So straight away we've got the Fire of London, the Plague, a lot of graffiti. On the left jam, same. You can see where people have been removing parts of stone, perhaps mixing from the medieval period, especially down here. They would mix that with various liquids and consume it in the belief it was holy. Right, we should go in. Unusual door handle. If I pan back, we can see the view from the door itself. You can see how thick the actual nave wall is. So as we pan back around, we're now in the nave itself. It's 47 feet by 18 feet. It's entirely original from 1220. It's very rare. Now in this year of 1220, the foundation stone is laid at Salisbury Cathedral. King Henry III has his second coronation at Westminster Abbey in London, and York Minster is rebuilt, or the process started. Just inside the door, we've got the list of the clergy of Tilty. So they list the abbots, the curates, and the vicars. And now they're called the priests in charge. You can see how thick the windows are, or the walls. We've got an array of very fine pine pews, and in the corner, straight ahead, we have our first memorial to Thomas Fackley, the Abbot of Tilty, 1470. 1470, isn't that incredible? And just down there's a tiny piscina with a Virgin Mary inside. Now if we look onto the aisle floor itself, there's an incredibly old slab. This is for Mahold de Mortimer of 1340. It says a foliated cross springs from a beast. Now, if we're looking straight in front of us, what we see is actually a 13th century locker, which would be the left one. '13th century. We've got a medieval painting. These are quite rare. You can see the colours they use. And I guess this would be for the holy water. You see the scratched in symbols. Let's have a look at this glorious ceiling, the woodwork. Now we're looking at the chancel, which is 19 feet by 24 feet. It's rebuilt in 1340. This chancel was built outside the east end. protecting the original chancel, and then the original chancel was dismantled. This chancel is a very early example of this period. Now just look at those two coffin lids of incredible age. Now these are believed to be from the two monks of 1215 that were killed by King John's soldiers, I guess. Don't quite understand the significance of the carving. A very modern looking pulpit. And I noticed beneath there's a bird. Just to the side of the pulpit. An ancient hand. If you look at the base of the pulpit, you can see an ancient stone that's been made to fit, or the pulpit has. Now we're looking at the east window. It's especially fine stonework on the 5 lights and tracery in the 2 centre heads. This is a fine window. And beneath, a display of flowers for the Harvest Festival, I guess. If we pan around to the corners, a very ancient looking Mother Mary and child, Jesus. And we've got these most beautiful flowers on the north window. Now these are all put together by the volunteers, a flower arranging group, I guess. Splendid. Now we have a memorial on the north side. Now this is a man in plate armour and his wife, and 3 sons and 2 daughters. What we're looking at is George Medley and Mary Dannett of 1562. I have an account here of life of George and Mary. It was written in a book dated 1550. 21 servants from London who stayed at Tilty's for 3 days and then returned to London. Upon the 23rd of November, 10 gentlemen came from London to attend Mary Tudor. They stayed at Tilty's until the 26th. Then after breakfast, with Mary Tudor and Lady Jane and Lady Catherine, on December the 2nd, 1550, Lady Catherine and Lady Mary and a great many gentlemen came to stay at Tilty's. And on the 16th of December there came to stay the Duke and Duchess of Suffolk, Lord and Lady Grain, divers from London. Stayed 7 days. December the 25th, dined at Tilty's, and upon the 26th and 27th, 5 players and a boy came. Set down great numbers that dined and supped at Tilty's. If we look down, we can see the children. And just above the memorial, I could see on the window board or shelf ancient writing. Be interesting to see what it says. Now on the south side, we've got an even more elaborate memorial. Now this is a man in plate armour, his wife and 5 sons and 6 daughters. The inscription, here lies Gerald Dannet and his wife Maria, from the county of Leicester, was a councillor of King Henry VIII, died 1520. Gerald Dannet was one of the most influential members of the Dannet family. He was involved in property deals throughout his life. In 1509, he became Privy Councillor to Henry VIII. He owned property in London where he was on duty. Dannet was invited to King Henry VIII's sister's marriage in 1515, so he was in the inner circle. The king's artist painted Dannet's portrait, so we know that what he looked like. The portrait is still with his family today. Gerald Dannet was on the guest list to attend the Field of the Cloth of Gold, a month-long extravaganza of jousting and lavish entertainment between England and France in Calais in 1520, but he died one month before. Here's his 5 sons, or their 5 sons, and 6 daughters. Now, 18 years later, in 1538, Gerald's corpse was dug up from Blackfriars, London, during the dissolution of the monasteries, and he was reinterred here where we stand. 2 years before, Tilty Abbey would have been razed to the ground with dynamite in 1536. Now, Maria, his wife, would buy and sell lands and properties just as her husband had. And Maria would outlive Gerald by 38 years and would never remarry. 7 of their 11 children would survive into adulthood. And just next to the memorial, there was another one which I've got no information on. But you can see a mother and her children, looks like 6 children. I just noticed 1590 is the date, but it looks like perhaps these children died in childbirth. In the corner, something of antiquity, most likely from the abbey itself. If we pan over, it's more beautiful flowers. And if we go up, we've got a face. We can make out these sedelias there, where the priest would have sat. Here they have a small cabinet that shows remnants from the past. So now we shall leave the old church. Let's have a little look at the ceiling again. It's a really nice small proportion organ there. If we look up there, we've got a hatchment, a funeral hatchment. Now traditionally these would be placed outside the deceased's house and then they're brought back in here. Now if we look up, we can just about see the bell. Now all I can tell you is it's a John Clark and it's 16 something or other. But it's unusual that we can actually see it. So here we have the font, and this was reassembled in 1950s. The actual stonework, it looks like it was from the 13th century, and the pillar most likely coming from the abbey itself. So we've been very lucky with the weather. And you can see how unusual this chancel is, the way it's been built. It's rectangular, and normally they'll be built positioned the other way around. Checkerboard flint, a bit more graffiti there. And you can see the niches here. So most likely would have had a statue either side. So this part of the building is 1220 and something from the past, got no idea what that is. Ladybirds. See hundreds of them. So St Mary the Virgin Church is active and they carry out baptisms, weddings and funerals. And I believe they're active part of the community, various programmes. This is a lovely church to visit. It's open, as I understand, most days, so please come in and have a look. Thank you very much.